Good evening. Welcome to Bridgecast. Today is April 29th, and we are here with Brian Jennings. Brian Jennings is, I'm sorry, my phone is actually on. Brian Jennings was one of my mentors a long time ago, or I didn't say too long ago, but when I was a student in Afton High School, he's currently teaching English there at Afton High School and is a board member also for Bridge Builders STL. He was with Kimba Jungo and others one of our first board members, and I would consider one of the founding members of this organization. So we're super happy to see him with us. I'm going to give a little bit of time for people to get on. We are going to draw the next raffle for the Waterway Car Wash, which I know a lot of you are excited about. We got a lot of support and a lot of people who actually put in their raffle for this. So no surprise, it's Waterway, of course, but also at the same time, we're really thankful that you guys continue to support the organization to make sure that it's possible for our exchange team members to go on it. Joe, is there anything you wanna give as Director of Development?
Yeah, I mean, just thank you so much. We definitely, our support for the raffle is increasing every week that we have it, so thank you so much that we're getting some community members that maybe we haven't even met before interested in the raffle and putting their name in. So that's really inspiring to see. And so thank you guys for continuing to support this organization, especially in this time, so we can continue to do the work that we do for many years to come.
Yes.
Should we draw the name now, or?
Yeah, I think it's a good time to draw the name. I want to give a quick housekeeping thing to Alex Hercules. He really wanted to be with us today, but he has something else taking his time right now, so he apologizes that he's not able to make it on, but he really wishes he was. So he'll be with us again next week when Dr. Kate Parsons from Webster University joins us on Bridgecast.
Alex is also a product of this wonderful man you see behind us at Afton. So yes, we've got the certificate right here. Again, the 3-month Blue Level Clean Car Club membership. Doesn't get any easier to say. And so this will be either dropped off safely or mailed to the person that receives it. And so I've got the names all here. Lots of them.
We have a lot of names in here, yes. So if your name isn't called, I'm sorry. I'm going to do my best.
A lot of people that we love very much, so I'm sorry if we don't call your name.
Okay. All right. Here we go. I got one. Kathy Peters.
Wonderful.
Kathy Peters.
Okay.
So, all right, Kathy, we're going to go ahead and make sure you get that. We can either mail it to you or drop it off to you, but we'll be in contact with you soon via email.
So thank you so much, and I'm sorry to everybody else that participated, but stay tuned. We've got lots of wonderful things coming your way. We are going to take this week off from the raffle, just so we don't keep shoving that down your throats. We want to give a little bit more focus still to the wonderful people that we have joining us from the community and our Bridge Builders Network.
Yes.
So no raffle this week. We'll post about that. But thank you so much to all of you who participated in the Waterway raffle, and join us next week, and we will have something to raffle off.
Yes, we're going to start doing raffles every other week to sort of disperse it for the longevity and sustainability of that particular program.
Yes.
So let's go into our conversation with Brian. Brian, we're going to dive right into it and start with John Rawles.
Well, do you want to have Brian introduce himself?
Oh, I think that's I give a little bit brief introduction. But Brian, is there anything else you'd like to introduce about yourself?
Oh, I think being part of Bridge Builders since kind of the inception has been a great reward. I would add that it's a great privilege to be here and steal some of your time tonight. I'm looking forward to tuning in to Dr. Parsons next week too. So.
I'm looking very forward to that as well, but I'm also super excited that you're here with us. Brian was really a start for a lot of my thoughts around philosophical thinking ways of justice, and even though he was an English teacher, I really saw a lot of the beginning philosophy and was a huge inspiration for me to start my studies at Webster University. And so let's go into John Rawles. In high school, we talked about the theory of justice, and I know that there's no way for us to sort of fully grasp in a couple of minutes what John Rawles was talking about with the theory of justice and those principles of justice, but can you perhaps give us a short elevator speech about what the theory of justice is with John Rawles?
Yeah, it might be easier for me to kind of talk about what we did with it in class and what we're sort of continuing kind of to do with it with class. I should say too, with the caveat that I am not a professional philosopher. But as a teacher of English, we have a class that's offered for dual credit through St. Louis University. And we pick themes, and the students pick themes, and one of them is conflict, social justice, and literature. And so one of the things I knew going in is I needed to have a sort of firm grounding and understanding what that term social justice meant. But for a lot of my students, they've heard it, but to actually be able to define it, we kind of flounder. So I went to John Rawles and his idea of social justice, and we kind of used that as a starting point. Michael Sandel has a great video series about justice from Harvard that we supplement it with, and then Martha Nussbaum's human capabilities approach, we come into it, that as well. But in some ways, it really comes back to the basic principles of justice. So as you know, there is this big theoretical sort of mechanism by which he gets to those principles. And then also embedded in those principles are two things that I think my students need to understand social justice. One is a statement that the humans have humans have certain rights and a certain dignity that is inviolable, regardless of whether or not that is for the welfare of society. And so in many ways in our class, that's kind of a starting point, that for Rawls, the individual and the individual's sort of dignity and desires being different from others, that's a given, right? So as a sort of counter to utilitarianism, which is a dominant thought at the time, Rawls is suggesting that utilitarianism doesn't work because it really doesn't take the individuality of the person seriously. So it doesn't take seriously enough that we have different desires, different wants, and that we are different people, and that you can't really come to an idea of what is good or not good for the group, treating everybody exactly the same. Now, with that said, that is for my students, each individual having rights and viable, that is in some ways hard for them to get their heads around, right? So for a high-achieving sort of college-bound senior to think that the child who committed a felony at the age of 13 deserves the same sort of dignity and respect as a human being, for some of them that takes some work, right? So for me, part of it is that Rawls's idea is grounded in the idea that basically for justice to work, each individual has to be seen as valuable because they showed up.
Yeah.
That's it. Nothing more than that. The other sort of background information that I think Michael Sandel talks about well in his video is this idea of what we deserve, right? Because the idea of justice, from Plato and up through is about fairness. It's about what is fair. And the idea that as individuals, and for an individual like myself, for instance, who is healthy and safe and has a roof over his head at this very uncertain time, to realize that is not only because of the choices that I have made, but that I have been incredibly lucky and fortunate, and there have just been accidents along the way that have led me to some of that good fortune. So if you were to ask me, for instance, do I deserve to be getting a paycheck? I think from a Rawlsian standpoint, that's kind of the wrong question, and it's the wrong word. The deserve is the problem. Because if we're serious, then we would realize that a lot of our good fortune comes from things beyond our control. To say that we deserve them is to overlook the fact that a lot of what we have done and a lot of the opportunities we've had have been beyond our control. So for him, again, that's arbitrary. That's not a moral issue. Moral issue is going to come into play with choice. So this sort of serves as the background. And then his principles, Theo, that each individual, and I'm going to get my paraphrasing wrong here, that each individual has a right to the same basic liberties as every other individual, as long as that's within a scheme of equal basic liberty for all, right?
Yeah.
And as Americans, this probably should sound very familiar, right? In other words, that we sort of have these freedoms and rights. The only boundaries are when we impede upon somebody else's freedoms and rights as well, right?
Yeah.
And so you would say that a society is not just if my rights, if my sort of me exercising my rights keeps you from exercising your rights. Well, that's not just, right?
Yeah.
If I talk the entire time, that I am in some ways not offering you a platform, then you don't have the same freedom of speech that I have. If I keep telling you to shut up, then, well, that's not fair, right? The second principle then is actually two parts. And one is that within the society where this first principle is held to, we need to have equal opportunities for all. And again, I'm grossly paraphrasing here. You can Google Rawls' Principles of Justice, and it's much more eloquent and much more specific. But there is that idea, again, that each individual should have the same opportunities. So my child, when she was born, has the same opportunities and no more opportunities than every other child who was born at the same time or at any time, right?
Yeah.
So the moment that you say this person cannot have this opportunity, then that's not a just society either, because that's not fair. And then the last principle of justice talks about equality. In some ways, this becomes, why not just make everything even, right? Why not just give everybody the same? Why not just level the playing field? And Rawls seems to suggest that although that wouldn't be a bad thing, to make sure that those who are worse off in a society, that the society and the rules change so that those who are usually worse off are better off. But he's going to say that I think we can do better. And so, for instance, I have this beautiful, amazing art student, Elena McAllister, who's a senior at Afton High School. And if anybody has ever seen her artwork, it is gorgeous. It is absolutely fabulous, right? And that artwork, I would say, that enriches my world, that brings something more to it. Well, I don't have that talent, right? So we read the story Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut as a sort of, well, this is what happens when the playing field is even. Harrison Bergeron is, and Rawls might say, by an accident of birth, through the natural lottery, he is incredibly gifted, incredibly intelligent, incredibly strong, and incredibly fit. And so in this society, to make things equal, they place sandbags on him. They put helmet on his head so his vision is off. And so it's basically reducing everything to the lowest common denominator. And that second principle of justice, as I read it, suggests no, in a society, in an organized society, it's not about sort of leveling the playing field. We want people like Elena to be able to make those beautiful masterpieces, even though the rest of us can't, right? That enriches our world. And we are saying in some ways, look, if it takes more resources for Elena to make that incredible art, well, okay. I think she should have those resources. At the same time, Elena's got to realize that part of the reason she's able to do what she does is because of circumstances beyond her control, because of who her parents were, because of their support, because of access to the actual resources and the medium she needs to make that beautiful artwork. So for her to sell her artwork and make millions of dollars and say, I deserve this, well, the second principle says, no, that's not the way it works, right? Is if you make those millions of dollars, you need, in a just society, we need mechanisms and institutions in place where that additional that we get can go to those who are the most in need of those resources. So if there is a sort of a moment for my students to sort of, they pause and consider that, because part of them are very high achieving, they're ambitious. Their idea of the American dream is being incredibly wealthy. And the idea that they are somehow entitled in a just society to give back to those who are worse off, that takes them a while to get their heads around as well.
Thank you. I know that is something that was not easy, but I think you did a very good job of paraphrasing it, so thank you.
You did wonderful. And you touched on this a little bit, but the next thing we were going to ask you to talk about is how do you see John Rawles' theory of justice applying in this specific time of the global situation that we're in?
I've been, this has been on my mind a lot. I'll have to say that I don't feel like I've had the time to really reflect a whole lot about it, because since things changed at school and since things have changed in our country and around the world, I think it's been a lot of sort of trying to deal with the new normal.
Right.
But I think it becomes glaringly obvious in times of stress like this where those injustices lie, right? I think for me, a learning moment was the death of Michael Brown, where I had, among other things, been talking about diversity and anti-racism and justice, and then here we have another young person dead, right, in our community. And I think that was kind of a wake-up call for me to realize that the perception of justice and justice are two different things, right? In other words, that if we perceive that people have an equal opportunity, that's one thing. If people actually have an equal opportunity, that's a different thing. And at that moment, I think if we are in our community being honest, we would have to say that no, if you have two children born in two different places in the city of St. Louis, they have two very different sort of expectations for their lives. And I believe that when I go back to Rawls's theory of justice, that part of justice becomes that each of them has an equal basic dignity. Each of them is entitled to live the fullest life possible. And the second principle says if somebody does not have the means, the resources, or the society is organized so that they are worse off than somebody else, then a just society addresses and corrects that, right? So one of the things I think that our current situation with the coronavirus has shown us is that a lot of things we said we couldn't do, no, we can do, right? If you look at Andrew Yang's proposal for universal basic income, right? We said, no, we can't do that, right? I mean, yes, we have people who are living below the poverty line. Yes, we have people who aren't, they don't have meals on a regular basis. And yes, perhaps a universal basic income would address that, but we just can't do it. But now we have checks that are going out, right, from the federal government. So I think the one of the things that when put up, again, under enough stress, we find ways to do things that we haven't done before. And so one of the questions I think coming out of this eventually will be, well, what do we do with that information, right? Yeah. We can address injustices. It is absolutely possible. And I think that this moment of stress reveals that. It also reveals a lot of the inequity and the injustice that is already there. It's just exacerbated by this, right? Yeah. So if you look at who is dying from this virus in our community, the first 25 people who died from the virus were African American, right? Well, the virus is an equal opportunity virus. The virus doesn't know skin color, right? So why is it that some members of our community are dying and others aren't? Well, again, I would suggest if you go back before all this happened, I don't know that it's that different, right? If you look at the average age expectancy of somebody, and again, I think when I come back to Rawls, it becomes, there should be no difference here, right? Yeah. And what we're seeing is, again, what I think were sort of things we had perceived as just are becoming patently clear that they're not.
Right. That is so much better than I could have ever answered.
Yeah. And I think that it answered our question so good that it also answered the next question we had after that. So instead, I'm going to immediately sort of try and throw a curveball. You were talking about how we are seeing things that we deem to be impossible now possible again. And one of the things that I think is very intersectional with the work that we do with Bridge Builders is also our sense of the environment and environmental justice around our community, right? And Earth Day was not too long ago. It was last week, and we didn't get a chance to hit on it too heavy last week, but I'd like to spend the time to talk about it a little bit today. How do you think our sense of climate, our sense of ecosystems and environment might play into this time as well, along the same thought process you just had?
Well, I think for me, the most glaring thing is we have choices, right? So again, when I come to discussions about climate change, and forget about the deniers, people are just going to be contrarian, right? But when we hear about people that are serious about it, the question is, well, like, what do we do with the environment so that we can kind of keep all of our other desires and all the other things we want, right? And I think what this moment has shown is, no, there's a clear choice here, right? There's the image that's going around in Nairobi that now that people are they're quarantining, and the pollution has dissipated to the point where they can see the mountain again that you used to be able to see from that city. Well, if we're honest with ourselves, we have a choice, right? Once we get out of this moment, if you want to see the mountain, you can see the mountain. But we will have to change what we were doing that created that pollution that kept that mountain from us. In a weird way, I'd say this has been a good moment for the planet, right? Bad for our species, good for the planet. But I think it is, again, that question of, when we come out of this, what do we do with that information? Do we put the veil back on and settle with the perception? Or do we say, no, we choose to be good stewards of the environment. We're aware that this is absolutely a justice issue, maybe the most important justice issue out there, because if we don't have a viable planet, then all the rest of it is moot.
Very good answer.
Incredible.
Thank you so much. And Joe has our next question.
This conversation is like soul food. It's like so wonderful. The next question is kind of something we've been asking everybody, but I believe is particularly pertinent in this conversation. How do you see everything that you've just discussed with John Rawles and beyond fitting into the work that you have done or you have seen with Bridge Builders, or just what Bridge Builders does overall or should strive to do overall?
I mean, I think part of it all comes back to me about meaningful relationships, right? And to me, those meaningful relationships, founded in a sense of justice, create the opportunity for people to lead meaningful, thriving lives, right? And I think when I talk about choice again, I think justice is you can choose to live with a sense of justice, right? Or you can choose not to, or you can pretend that you can't choose, but that's bad faith. So I think really what Bridge Builders has done so well, I think, is to say, let's take a community like the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation, and particularly the town of Dupree. Let's take a look at let's develop a meaningful relationship with that community. Let's develop a meaningful relationship with the people that are in that community. And then when we look at the bigger community, which is us and Dupree, right? I think those issues of justice, again, they become glaringly obvious, right? I'm wondering very much, in the Afton School District, there's quite a lot that's been done to try and sort of acknowledge that we have inequity, and to try and get our students the resources who don't have the resources of others to them, right? And I think when you look at the St. Louis Dupree community as one community, then again, those needs become really glaringly obvious. So I think in some ways for me, and I'm sure I'm massively oversimplifying the concept of justice. I'm absolutely sure I'm absolutely oversimplifying the concepts that John Rawles is throwing out there. But if what I would hope to do for my students is to say, if you see injustice, if you see people who are being given different rights for arbitrary reasons, if you see anybody who is not being treated with human dignity, and that's excused for any reason, if you see that there are not equal opportunities for people, if you see that there are people in need and no one's tending to that, then it's your job to do that, right? And it's not always easy to know how, and that's okay, right? But what's not permissible is to look away.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go ahead and skip to our final question. You spoke about the oversimplification of justice. I'm going to try and dig in, and I'm going to ask, what is justice to you? We talk about, you spoke about it not being permissible to look away, and hoping one day to continue to build this sense of a better community, a beloved community, by installing a sense of justice. And so for you, what is justice personally?
I hate to oversimplify anymore and say fairness. But no, I mean, here's what justice looks like to me. I have two kids. Charlotte's 11 and Nora's 14, right? I want them to have every opportunity to lead the best possible life they can, whatever that means. And I have no idea what that means. But I want every child to have that opportunity. The idea that my children would have that opportunity at the expense of someone else, that to me is injustice, right?
Yeah.
So maybe I have a better sort of idea of injustice than justice there. I don't know. But what it means is no, I don't know if that might be the only example I really have.
No, that's a totally fine answer.
Josh thought long and hard about this question to try to stump you. So.
Yeah. The first thing is we know it is complicated, right?
Yeah.
Because here's another answer that's equally doesn't work as well. It's so my wife is a student and a teacher of Eastern religion, and she talks about an example with the Buddha. And the Buddha and a disciple are walking through a forest, and somebody comes out and they've been shot full of arrows. And the disciple says to the Buddha, where did those arrows come from? And the Buddha says, wrong question, right?
Yeah.
This person is suffering. You tend to the suffering of others, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's another non-answer answer.
I think it's a good answer nonetheless, though. I think both your examples speak really highly to this idea of care. And we've spoken throughout a series of our different Bridgecast about what we're trying to accomplish with Bridge Builders, and ultimately care through self-described needs, and that compassionate relationship forming that you spoke about earlier as well. I think both the ideas of justice really reign true and resonate with me as well, for those very reasons. The kinship of having children of your daughters, and interacting with our community in the same thoughtful and compassionate way, I think is empowering in its own sense. So thank you. I think we're going to go ahead and close it there.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to share or talk about while you have the time, Brian?
Oh, I just again, thank you for letting me ramble on. And you and Joe are both amazing, and it's amazing and wonderful, and a great privilege to be able to have a meaningful relationship with both of you and everybody at Bridge Builders, and the work that you're doing, the work that we're doing with Bridge Builders is important work, right? And it's going to be more important than ever.
Absolutely. Thank you again for your time, Brian, and I really do
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thank you so much, yes.
Thank you to everyone watching. Next week we're going to have Dr. Kate Parsons on. And I think she's going to segue very well with what Brian has been speaking about here. I know she has some very interesting ideas about justice and care as well, and we'll just continue to build on our thoughts. And so you at home can continue to develop your own philosophy around justice and around care and how we can interact with our communities. Again, please stay connected with us, interact with us in the best way we can. We love to have conversations. The ways that those genuine relationships are formed is through community, and we can't start that community unless we know who you are. So let us know, and we'd love to get you a part of our community. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you again so much for your support.